Oy vey. All right. Welcome, everyone. So, we've spent 2 podcasts now talking about the Mongols, their very impressive rise to power, their collapses, the various reasons for that. But now we're going to talk about the actual responses to the Mongols the rest of the world had. Let's talk about Russia. What we already know is that the Golden Horde began ruling in Russia in 1240. And after the Mongols defeated the Kievan Rus, the Golden Horde made their capital at the mouth of the Volga, which is also the end of the overland caravan route from Central Asia. So you've already got some trade going on, so you're going to have quite a bit of influence from the Mongols traveling back through that caravan route. And from their capital, the Mongols ruled Russia from afar. And this is a really, really big difference that you might want to take very careful notes on. Compare and contrast Mongol rule, perhaps, in different locations. Just saying, hint, hint, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. So, from their capital, the Mongols are ruling Russia from afar. They leave the Orthodox Church alone. And they also use Russian princes as sort of little local governors. They are agents of the Mongol Empire. And in other Mongol realms, the main goal of the Golden Horde was to extract taxes, so that's not different. So economically, it's the same. The goal at the end of the day, how much money can we get from these people? But big difference is, for the most part, culturally, they're leaving them alone. Politically, pay your taxes. We'll leave you alone. Prince Alexander of Novgorod had assisted the Mongols in their conquest of Russia. Pause for dramatic effect. Pause for the fact we have a, what's the word I want to use for puppet, traitor, looking out for himself. It's fine. All of the above. But Prince Alexander had assisted the Mongols in their conquest of Russia. We talked about Mongol reputation in the first podcast. They had a very, very well-known reputation of, when we arrive, you really should consider just surrendering. Just give up. Just drop your weapons and lay down, play dead. If you don't, we will win. We will kill you. And if you somehow manage to survive this battle, well, you'll die anyway. So he gets all of the little princes and the little kingdoms in Russia to just surrender and give up. And because of that, they favored Novgorod and Moscow, which was ruled by Prince Alexander's brother. Helps to have friends and family in high places. And the favor shown to these two cities, combined with the Mongol devastation of the Ukrainian countryside, caused the Russian population to shift from Kiev towards Novgorod and Moscow. Moscow will emerge as the new center of Russian civilization. Some historians believe that Mongol domination had a very negative impact on Russia because it brought economic depression and cultural isolation, which it did, because Russia is not really going to be influenced by anything happening in Europe. By the time the rest of the world has outlawed serfdom, Russia's just starting to use it. I want you to keep that in mind, because we talk a lot about connections. Like, that's what modern or AP World History is. Modern world history focuses on the past. What are those connections? This is a big one, guys. The Mongols succeed in isolating Russia, cutting it off from the rest of the world by having the capital move from what would be the Ukrainian countryside, would be Kiev, to Moscow, so further inland. When the Renaissance happens, Russia has no idea. They're not impacted by that. Very, very isolated. Thus, when the rest of the world is very progressive and they're giving rights out to everybody, we're talking about equal rights, not just for men and women, but equal rights among the social classes. Russia's not doing that. They're very far behind in terms of being politically fair to everyone, and this really is what is going to end up leading to their downfall. But we will talk about that in Unit 6. Picture March, February or March. We'll get back to that. So hold that thought for a while. Anyway, other historians argue that the Kievan state was already declining when the Mongols came, which is true. This is why it was so easy for the Mongols to take over. The overtaxation of Russians under Mongol rule was the work of the Russian princes. Russia was also isolated by the Orthodox Church. And again, we talked about government before. The structure of Russian government didn't change for the better under Mongol rule. It changed for the worse. And eventually, the princes of Moscow would turn against the Mongols in 1380, which would overthrow them. Europe was divided between the political forces of the papacy and those of the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II. Under these conditions, the states of Eastern Europe, especially Hungary and Poland, faced the Mongol attacks alone. The Mongol armies that attacked Europe were not actually just Mongols. They were Turks, Chinese, Iranians, and Europeans, and led by Mongol generals. Because keep in mind, what you have to remember, think how many Mongol Khanates there are. Think about the regions that they're actually impacting. That's why I told you guys earlier, remember this, focus on this map, look at what modern day nations are involved. That matters when we're talking about the battles between Europe and the Mongols. The Europeans eventually, after fighting and losing, because don't forget, they tried to unite, take out the Golden Horde. That didn't go so well for them when suddenly both rulers of the Ilkhan and the Golden Horde are now Muslims. Just remember that. Contact between Europeans and Mongols increased throughout the 13th century. And as I mentioned before, the increases of math, science, geography, astronomy, all of this under the Mongols eventually makes its way to Europe. And this is how we've got trading. That knowledge is going to go through Central Asia into Europe, Eastern, then Western Europe, and influences the work of Copernicus. But along with the spread of ideas and the spread of new knowledge, you also have the spread of the bubonic plague. And this caused Europeans to question all the accepted customs they had, their religious beliefs, because they began to wonder, what could we have done to deserve this punishment from God? Like, we must have done something truly, truly awful. And then you have Carpe Diem, YOLO. And this is actually, I want you guys to remember that this bubonic plague that spreads from the Mongols to Europe, this questioning of, why are we being punished? What did I do wrong? I could die at any moment, is actually going to get people thinking, hey, you only live once. And this is what starts the Renaissance. This is what starts the age of exploration, looking for new lands, because the Renaissance, this is what starts the Enlightenment of people thinking, well, how come the king gets to tell me to do whatever he wants? How come I as an individual don't have rights, when if it wasn't for people like me, the king would have no power? All of it can be traced back to this event. That's pretty awesome. But then again, that's history. The rise and fall of the Mongol domination in the 13th and 14th centuries was accompanied by strong centralizing states. You have Lithuania, you have various Balkan kingdoms, and these new formed areas are able to capitalize on the decline of the Mongol power and assert control, especially Poland. During the period of Mongol domination, Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, functions as a route that actually links Europe and Asia. Europe to Constantinople, to the rest of Asia, and this is what starts the Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans established themselves in eastern Anatolia in the 1300s, but they're kept in check by the Timurids. They began expanding eastward in the 1400s, and a lot of people say that the beginning of the Ottoman Empire is when the Ottomans are able to conquer Constantinople in 1453. So they finally take that away from what was Byzantium, the Byzantine Empire. They take that, they keep the name, they don't change Constantinople, but that is what many argue is the end of the Byzantine, beginning of the Ottomans. But they're already in power for 150 years before that event. Just smaller power. Oh, and by the way, the Cubs. Think you guys should know. The last time the Cubs won the World Series, the Ottomans were still in power. Throwing that out there for you. Connections. Cubs win the World Series, November 2016. believe the last time that happened was 1909. So the Ottomans are still a thing. Connections. All right. I saw the Ottoman Empire. We will come back to that quite a bit. There is an entire chapter devoted to the gunpowder empires on Ottomans, Mughals, and Safavids. Give it a little time, though. Let's talk about Korea. We're going to change directions completely and move on to Korea, Japan, and retouching on Vietnam. Korea from the Mongols to the Choson Dynasty. We're focusing on 1231 to 1500. The Choi family assumes role of protector of the Koryo kings, and Korea's leaders initially resisted Mongol invasions, which were led by Mongke, the last great Khan, because Kublai takes over in 1260. But they gave up in 1258 because the king of Koryo surrendered and joined his family to the invading Mongols by marriage. He ends up marrying one of his daughters off to the Mongols. And this was, again, we talked about it, it's a pretty common thing. The Koryo kings fell under the influence of the Mongols, and Korea profits from exchange with the Yan with new technologies. And cotton, gunpowder, astronomy, calendar making, celestial clocks are introduced to Korea from China. Korea collapsed shortly after the fall of the Yan, and they're replaced by the Yi dynasty. They call themselves the Choson. Like the Ming, the Yi reestablished local identity, Korean customs. They restored the status of Confucian scholarship while maintaining Mongol-style administration practices and institutions. So they're taking what they like, getting rid of what they don't, and they're making quite a unique style. Technological innovations of the Yi period include the use of movable type in copper frames. So no more just woodblock printing. We actually have movable type that you can rotate now. You have meteorological science, a local calendar, the use of fertilizer, which I live in the country and the farmers are making use of that invention right now. The engineering of reservoirs. The growing of cash crops, especially cotton, became very common and popular in the Yi period. The Koreans were innovators. Among their inventions, they have patrol ships with cannons mounted on them. So it's not just, hey, someone's coming, we should get ready for that. It's, hey, we're on the lookout now. We are going back and forth because they've been conquered a number of times. They've been attacked a number of times. And this is not the last time they're going to be conquered by somebody. They also have gunpowder arrow launchers and armored ships. They're quite cute. I'll show you a picture in class. Political transformations in Japan. The first unsuccessful Mongol invasion of Japan was in 1274, and it made the decentralized lords of Kamakura, Japan, develop quite a sense of unity because the shogun then begins taking steps to centralize the government and then to plan and prepare for what they know is going to be a second assault. And the second Mongol invasion, 1281, also a fail. It was defeated by a combination of Japanese defensive preparations, can never go wrong, but in addition, there was also a typhoon. And the Kamakura actually took this as the gods were on their side, which would be hard not to when the enemy comes at you and then a typhoon hits and wipes out half of their ships. Interestingly enough, this will also happen during the Golden Age, the Elizabethan era, the Spanish Armada. Yeah, her troops are armed, they're ready, but Storm takes out a number of the ships. Same concept here, and just like the Mongols, she takes that as God's on my side. So again, you've got the incorporation of religion to legitimize your rule. The Kamakura shogunate was destroyed, however, in a civil war, and the Ashikaga shogunate was established in 1338. This was a period where you have relatively weak shogun control, but strong provisional lords who are responsible for developing markets, religious institutions, schools, and increased agricultural production, which is kind of a good thing. You also have a very unique trend of artists and poetry and simple elegance, clean-cut architecture. You have gardens begin for relaxation because of the popularity of Zen Buddhism, which focuses more on meditation and the spirit of self versus ritual. As you can tell, Bella's very excited by this too. After the Onan War of 1477, there's quite a bit of conflict over the succession of the retirement of Yoshimasa. He's a shogunate who exercised little power. Provinces are controlled by regional lords who then begin fighting with each other. But these lords carry out trade with continental Asia. So while there's definitely some perks, you also have a lot of interregional fighting, which isn't good for anybody. But culture in this period, the Heian period, not a 794 to 1156. So you have the growth of very large land estates. And this is a very interesting time period in Japan. So this is the start of feudalism. Arts and literature flourish. From China, writing is borrowed, artistic styles, Buddhism, but not the civil service exam. We talked about that before. So Zen Buddhism is the Japanese variation of Mahayana Buddhism. As you guys know, quick review, from India to China, now to Japan. And Zen Buddhism will eventually make its way from Japan to China. And this reinforces the values of self-discipline, of mental health. And the Japanese period of Heian culture is very popular. It's known for beauty. It's known for courtly rituals, courtly love. We know quite a bit about it because of the Tale of Genji, which was actually the first novel written by a woman, and the Pillow Book as well. Another of the first written by a woman, but it's very, very detailed with court life during this period. And sorry, go back super quick. Women within this period were actually out and about, unlike previous shogunates in control where women were inside. During the Heian period, women who were at the court were very prominently seen. Within feudalism, you've got political, economic, and a social system based on loyalty, the holding of land, and military service. So emperor is really a figurehead. It's the shogun who's in charge. But then based on where you're at, you have your daimyos, which are the local lords. They're basically, think of a mini shogun is what they are. They're the really powerful samurai. But they go from all powerful to the shogun is once again in charge. The emperor reigned, but did not always rule. And this will really be the case with shoguns in power and the emperor really being a figurehead until we hit up the Meiji Restoration. The emergence of Vietnam. So we talked about Vietnam a bit in our last podcast. We're kind of going back though, since we're talking more about the Mongols and the Ming. I wanted to mention their influence on Vietnam as well. And as you know, we have the Chinese influenced Annam in the north and the Indian influenced Champa in the south. The Mongols extracted tribute from both states, but when the Yan Empire fell, they actually began to fight against each other. And the Ming ruled Annam through a puppet government for almost 30 years in the early 15th century. Eventually, the Annam are able to throw off Ming control, and by 1500, Annam had conquered Champa and established a Chinese-style government uniting Vietnam. And that's where we're going to stop for this week. Tune in next time as we begin discussing transformations throughout the world, focusing on Europe and its impact. It plays a role, guys. Keep in mind that Black Death is more powerful than you might think it is. So, as always, email me with those questions. Think about what you've read. Perhaps start getting ready for that essay on Mongol control, Golden Horde, Ilkhan, China. Consider it. Get ready for it. And as always, have a great night, guys. Cheers.